I can't do this anymore, Mom. That's what my son said right before the line went dead. I was standing in my kitchen, phone pressed to my ear, hearing his wife in the background, sharp, angry whispers I wasn't supposed to catch. Then his voice again, colder than I'd ever heard it. Emily doesn't want you around. And honestly, it's easier if I agree. Easier. My knees actually buckled. I grabbed the counter so I wouldn't fall. I asked him what I had done, my voice sounded strange, like it belonged to someone else. He sighed, the way you do when you're tired of explaining something obvious to a child. You're always upset. You make things tense. Emily says you cross boundaries. I hadn't seen him in 3 months. I hadn't raised my voice. I hadn't even complained when I was uninvited from Thanksgiving. But now I was being told I was the problem. Then came the sentence that split something open in me. We think it's best if you don't contact us for a while. Especially not the kids. The kids. My grandchildren. I said his name, just once. The way I used to when he was little and scared in the dark. There was a pause. I thought maybe, just maybe, he'd remember who I was to him. Instead, he said, I have to go. Emily's upset. The call ended. No goodbye. I stood there in silence, staring at my reflection in the microwave door, realizing my own son had chosen his wife, and left me behind without a second thought. Before all of this, it was always just me and my son. I raised Mark on my own after his father walked out when Mark was 6. I worked double shifts, packed his lunches at midnight, sat in the front row at every school play even when I was running on 3 hours of sleep. He used to call me his safe place. When he had nightmares, he'd crawl into my bed. When he got his first heartbreak, he cried on my shoulder and told me I was the only one who really understood him. We talked every day. Not out of obligation, but because we wanted to. He'd call me on his drive home from work, tell me about his boss, his plans, the life he was building. When he proposed to Emily, I was the first person he told. I cried happy tears and told him how proud I was. I believed, truly believed, that no matter who he married, our bond was solid. Even after the wedding, I tried to be careful. I didn't give advice unless he asked. I didn't show up unannounced. I watched my words. I wanted to be the kind of mother-in-law no one complains about. The kind you feel lucky to have. That's why the distance confused me at first. Fewer calls. Shorter texts. Cancelled plans. He'd say things like, Emily's stressed, or now's not a good time. I told myself it was normal. People grow up. Lives get busy. I never imagined I was slowly being erased. At first, Emily was polite in the way people are polite when they don't actually like you. Her smile never reached her eyes. She corrected me in small ways, my recipes, my stories, even the way I pronounced things. Mark had grown up saying my way his whole life. If I laughed it off, she'd tilt her head and say, I'm just being honest. If I stayed quiet, she'd later tell Mark I was being cold. She talked a lot about boundaries. Not hers, theirs. Rules that seemed reasonable on the surface but always landed in the same place, me on the outside. Don't call after 8. Don't stop by unless invited. Don't talk about the past because it makes Mark emotional. Don't give opinions because it feels controlling. When I tried to adjust, the rules shifted. If I brought a gift, it was too much pressure. If I didn't, it meant I didn't care. If I asked how she was doing, I was prying. If I stayed quiet, I was passive-aggressive. Mark started repeating her words back to me. Same phrases. Same tone. He'd say things like, you need to respect our marriage, even when all I'd done was ask how his day was. Once, during dinner, Emily laughed and said, Mark says you get emotional when you feel left out. Everyone laughed. Mark didn't correct her. That's when I felt it, not anger, not yet, but the first sharp sting of something breaking. She wasn't just setting boundaries. She was rewriting my place in his life. It didn't happen all at once. That's what makes it so hard to explain to people now. Mark didn't suddenly become cruel. He became distant. Careful. Guarded. Every conversation felt like a test I didn't know I was taking. If I said the wrong thing, he'd sigh and say, "Emily feels like you're criticizing her." If I defended myself, it turned into, "See? This is why she feels unsafe around you." Unsafe. That word hit me like a slap. Emily started framing everything as concern. She worried I was too dependent on Mark. She worried I expected emotional labor. She worried my presence stressed their marriage. All of it delivered softly, sweetly, always when I wasn't in the room. Mark stopped telling me things. I'd hear about job changes, trips, even small milestones from Facebook. When I asked why he hadn't told me, he said, "We're just trying to keep our life private." Once, I overheard Emily on the phone. She didn't know I was in the other room. She said, "I just think he needs to choose what kind of family he wants now." Her voice was calm. Confident. After that, Mark started canceling plans last minute. Birthdays became quick texts. Holidays were busy this year. When I asked if I'd done something wrong, he paused too long before answering. "No," he said. "But things have to change." I realized then that the version of me Emily was describing, overbearing, emotional, intrusive, was slowly becoming the only version Mark could see, and no matter how quietly I spoke, she was always louder in his ear. The first visit they canceled was Thanksgiving. A text. Not even a call. "We've decided to keep the holiday low stress this year. No alternative date. No invitation to come by later. Just, gone." I told myself it was fine. Couples do that. I didn't want to be that mother. Then Christmas plans became uncertain. My calls started going to voicemail. When Mark did answer, he sounded distracted, like he was rushing to get off the phone. Conversations that used to last an hour barely hit 5 minutes. I stopped initiating for a while, just to see. Silence. No check-in. No "how are you?" No explanation. Weeks passed. Then months. I watched my son's life through social media, dinners, trips, smiles, all carefully cropped so I was nowhere in the frame. When I finally asked, directly, if I'd done something wrong, Mark sighed and said, "Mom, this is exactly what I mean. You always make it about you." That sentence broke something in me. I wasn't asking for attention. I was asking for clarity. For honesty. For my son. Instead, I got distance dressed up as maturity. And that was just the beginning of being erased. The moment that still makes my stomach drop happened at my nephew's birthday barbecue. I almost didn't go, I already felt unwelcome, but my son, Ethan, texted, "You can come if you want." That "if you want" should have warned me. I showed up with a gift and a smile I had practiced in the car. Everyone was in the backyard. Laughter. Music. And then silence, that subtle, awkward pause when you realize you're not supposed to be there. Ethan's wife, Lauren, looked straight at me and said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "Oh. I didn't know you were coming." Not surprised. Annoyed, like I'd tracked mud into her living room. I tried to brush it off, but then it got worse. When it was time for family photos, Lauren called out names, cousins, siblings, friends, and skipped right over me. I waited, standing there like an idiot, until someone asked, "Shouldn't his mom be in the picture?" Lauren smiled sweetly and said, "We're keeping it immediate family only." Immediate. Family. Ethan didn't say a word. He didn't look at me. He just stood there, arm around her, letting it happen. People stared. Someone gave me a pity smile. I felt my face burn, my hands shake. I quietly set the gift down and walked back to my car before anyone could see me cry. I sat there for a long time, keys in my hand, realizing something terrifying. She wasn't just pushing me out privately anymore. She was erasing me, publicly, and my son was letting her. That's when the narrative flipped completely. One day I wasn't a worried mother trying to understand what was happening, I was suddenly the problem. My son, Michael, sat across from me at a cafe, arms crossed, eyes cold in a way I'd never seen before. He said things that didn't sound like him at all. That I was too emotional. That I'd made everything about myself. That his wife, Lauren, felt unsafe around me. Unsafe. Because I asked why I wasn't invited to holidays. Because I cried when he stopped calling. When I tried to defend myself, he sighed, actually sighed, and said, "See? This is exactly what Lauren means." Every memory was rewritten. If I remembered us being close, he said I was exaggerating. If I brought up things Lauren had said to me, he claimed I misunderstood her tone. If I reminded him of sacrifices I made for him, he accused me of guilt-tripping. Lauren never raised her voice. She didn't have to. She smiled softly and said things like, "I just think she struggles with boundaries," while Michael nodded beside her. I left that cafe shaking, questioning my own sanity. I replayed conversations in my head at night, wondering if I really was controlling, if I really was the monster they were describing. That's the cruelest part of gaslighting, it doesn't scream. It whispers until you start doubting your own memories. I didn't fall apart all at once. It happened in pieces. Quietly. In moments no one saw. It was the night I sat alone at my kitchen table, staring at my phone, realizing I hadn't heard my son's voice in weeks. Not even a text. Not even a reaction emoji. Just silence, thick, heavy, deliberate. I replayed every conversation in my head, searching for the moment I became the villain in his story. The moment I crossed a line I was never told about. I cried in a way I hadn't since my own mother died. The kind of crying that leaves your chest aching and your body exhausted. I kept thinking, I raised him. I protected him. I loved him more than myself. How did that turn into this? Then the self-blame started. Maybe I was too much. Maybe I should have stayed quieter. Maybe loving him openly was a mistake. I caught myself apologizing out loud to an empty room, practicing words he would never hear. What hurt most wasn't just losing my son. It was watching him believe lies about me. Seeing my love rewritten as control. My concern reframed as manipulation. And knowing I had no way to defend myself without proving their point. That's when something broke inside me. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Just a deep, aching crack where hope used to live. The moment it finally clicked wasn't dramatic. No shouting. No slammed doors. It was quiet, and somehow that made it worse. I was sitting alone at my kitchen table, staring at my phone, rereading messages between me and my son, Michael. Messages where I apologized for things I didn't understand. For overstepping. For making things uncomfortable. For existing, it felt like. And suddenly I noticed something that made my stomach drop. The language wasn't his. Michael never used phrases like emotional boundaries or negative energy. He never talked about protecting our peace. Those words weren't him, they were hers. His wife, Lauren. I had heard her say them before, always with that calm, superior smile, like she was explaining something simple to a child. I realized then that I wasn't talking to my son anymore. I was talking through him. Every message filtered. Every decision pre-approved. Every distance carefully engineered. And worse, I realized this wasn't sudden. This had been happening slowly, intentionally. Each cancelled visit. Each ignored call. Each accusation that I was too much. It wasn't me losing my son. It was someone removing me. I thought back to all the times I defended Lauren. Told myself I was imagining things. Told myself to be patient. To be kind. To not cause trouble. And it hit me, my silence hadn't kept the peace. It had trained them that I would accept being erased. That night, for the first time, I stopped asking what did I do wrong? And started asking a far more dangerous question, what if I'm not the problem at all? I didn't wake up strong one morning. It wasn't empowering or cinematic. It was quiet. It happened the day I realized I had typed a long message to my son, explaining myself again, and then deleted it before sending. My hands were shaking, but something inside me was done begging. I stopped calling. Not to punish him, I was too tired for games, but because every unanswered ring felt like another small death. I stopped checking my phone every 5 minutes. I stopped rehearsing conversations in my head where I finally said the right thing and he suddenly understood. For the first time, I asked myself a question no one had ever asked me before: what do I need to survive this? I started protecting my heart the way I used to protect him when he was little. I limited what I shared with family members who ran back to him and his wife with every word. I unfollowed them on social media. I boxed up old photos I wasn't ready to look at yet. I cried, a lot, but privately. No audience. No explanations. Just grief, processed honestly. And slowly, painfully, something shifted. The ache was still there, but it wasn't controlling me anymore. I realized I had spent months trying to prove I wasn't the villain they'd painted me as. That was a fight I could never win, because the story had already been written without me. So I stepped out of it. I didn't harden. I didn't turn bitter. I simply became quiet, and in that quiet, I began to feel something unfamiliar but steady. Self-respect. The hardest part wasn't cutting contact, it was accepting that I had to. For months I'd been clinging to scraps, unanswered texts, one-word replies from my son, awkward silences where warmth used to be. Every interaction left me feeling smaller. So I stopped reaching first. I muted the family chat. I told myself I wouldn't check my phone every 5 minutes, waiting for an apology that never came. At first, the silence was unbearable. I kept replaying old memories, him as a little boy holding my hand, him calling me when he got his first real job, him saying, "Mom, I couldn't have done this without you." Now I was treated like an inconvenience, a problem to be managed. His wife had framed it as healthy boundaries, but somehow those boundaries only applied to me. Everyone else was welcome. So I made my own. I stopped explaining myself. I stopped defending my intentions. I stopped accepting last-minute invitations that felt like charity. When relatives asked why I was being cold, I simply said I was taking care of myself. No drama. No speeches. Something unexpected happened in that quiet. I started to breathe again. The constant anxiety eased. I realized how much energy I'd been wasting trying to earn love that should have been unconditional. Distance didn't erase the pain, but it finally gave me clarity. It happened on a Tuesday evening, quiet and ordinary, which somehow made it worse. My phone buzzed, and when I saw my son's name on the screen, my chest tightened like it used to before bad news. We hadn't spoken in months. Real months. No holidays. No birthdays. Just silence I'd finally learned to live with. I stared at the screen for a long time before answering. His voice sounded careful. Polite. Not warm, controlled, like someone choosing words from a script. He asked how I was, as if we were distant acquaintances. No apology, no acknowledgement of how abruptly I'd been erased from his life. Then came the shift. He mentioned stress. Bills. A complicated situation. He said his wife had been having a hard time. That they were overwhelmed. That things hadn't gone the way they expected. Each sentence felt like it was circling something without naming it. Finally, he said, "We were hoping you could help us out. Just temporarily." I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, because it was surreal. After months of being treated like a problem, like an inconvenience, like someone who needed to respect boundaries, suddenly I was useful again. Suddenly my existence mattered. I realized then that this call wasn't about reconnection. It wasn't about regret. It was about need. And for the first time since all of this began, I wasn't desperate to be chosen. I was calm. Clear. and painfully aware that the balance had shifted, whether he realized it yet or not. When my son finally called, his voice sounded unfamiliar. Softer. Careful. Gone was that sharp, dismissive tone he'd used the last time he told me I was causing problems and needed to respect his marriage. He didn't start with Mom. He started with, "Hey, how have you been?" And in that moment, something inside me clicked into place. Months ago, I would have rushed to fill the silence. I would have explained myself, apologized for things I didn't do, begged him to let me back into his life. I would have cried the second I heard his voice. But now? I felt calm. Detached. Grounded. I told him the truth, briefly. That I was fine. That I'd been focusing on my own life. That I wasn't angry anymore. There was a pause on the line. Then he started talking fast. Too fast. About stress. About misunderstandings. About how his wife never meant to hurt anyone. About how things had gotten out of hand. I didn't interrupt. I didn't argue. I didn't defend myself. For the first time, I was the one not chasing. When he finally stopped talking, I said quietly, "I hear you. But I'm not going back to how things were." Another pause. Longer this time. That's when I realized the balance had shifted. He could feel it too. It didn't happen all at once. There was no dramatic apology, no movie-style breakdown. The consequences showed up quietly, in the cracks. My son started calling without her on the line. Short calls at first. Awkward pauses. He asked how I was and actually waited for the answer. He told me he was tired all the time, that things at home felt tense. I didn't say "I told you so." I didn't say anything that would give her ammunition later. What I did notice was how she stopped controlling the narrative. Family events she once dominated suddenly felt different. Invitations came through him, not her. When I showed up, she was polite, stiff, tight-lipped, watching. The woman who once decided when I was allowed to exist in my son's life no longer had that power. And my son? He started realizing what he'd traded away. Old photos. Old traditions. The safety of being loved without conditions. He mentioned missing Sunday dinners. Missing how things used to be. That hurt, but it was also proof. Proof that choosing silence and self-respect hadn't cost me everything. It had simply shifted the balance. She lost control because I stopped fighting her. He lost something irreplaceable because he believed her. And I gained something I hadn't had in years, peace. I never imagined my life would lead me here, learning how to love my child from a distance. For a long time, I thought being a good mother meant enduring anything. Staying quiet. Swallowing pain. Apologizing even when I hadn't done anything wrong. But losing my son the way I did taught me a painful truth: love without boundaries isn't love, it's self-erasure. When my son chose his wife over me, it felt like a death. Not dramatic, just empty. But in that emptiness, something new grew. I learned to stop chasing people who were comfortable watching me hurt. I learned that dignity is not cruelty, and boundaries are not punishment. They are protection. I didn't win by cutting anyone down. I won by standing still. By refusing to beg. By choosing peace over proving my worth to people who had already decided I wasn't worth listening to. To any parent reading this who feels replaced, dismissed, or blamed for things you didn't do, please hear this: you are allowed to step back. You are allowed to say enough. You can love your child without accepting manipulation, disrespect, or emotional abuse. Sometimes the strongest thing a parent can do isn't holding on tighter, it's letting go with self-respect intact. And if your child ever finds their way back, they should meet not a broken version of you, but a whole one.